We're now moving into the last school of philosophy we'll be looking at, which are called the existentialist philosophers. In today's session, we'll look primarily at Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish father of existentialism, who did his writing mostly in the mid-1800s, and the French existential thinker from the 20th century, died in 1973, Gabriel Marcel. And we'll look at the atheistic existentialists, primarily Nietzsche, Camus, and Sartre, next week during our last session. Who are the existentialists? And existentialism is not simply a school of philosophy, but greatly influenced the field of psychology. There is a school of thinking called humanistic or existential psychology. They also influence the arts, literature, plays, movies, and even some scientific perspective. What makes you an existentialist is really 4 or 5 major themes that I'll mention. The first is the desire to be an individual rather than to get lost in a crowd. This perhaps is the legacy of Rousseau onto the existentialists. Often people prefer to hide in a crowd because then you don't have to take a stand or accept the responsibility of your own actions. The second theme is freedom. The existentialists reject all forms of determinism and suggest that we alone make our decisions which determine our futures. And in rejecting determinism, that means all forms of determinism that we've seen in this class, going back to the fatalism of Greek mythology, to the Stoicism and the idea that there's this force called Logos that controls our lives, or even the determinism of the materialistic philosophy of Thomas Hobbes, where we're all subject merely to the whims and whimsies of cause and effect. And thirdly, since we are free, we must accept the responsibility for our behavior rather than running away from that. Psychologists have been quick to recognize. Erich Fromm, for example's book Escape from Freedom, recognizes this existential theme, that many people would prefer not to be free because they know that if they're free, they have to accept the responsibility for their free choices. Rather be told what to do, rather listen to some form of determinism. Another one is the distinction between participant and spectator. Existentialists suggest that too many people go through life sort of watching it go by, rather than becoming intimately involved. Some of our existentialists, well, all in fact, have been very involved persons, but I think of Camus and Sartre, thinkers we'll look at again next week, who were active members of the French Revolution during the Nazi occupation of Paris, for example. And finally, there is a desire to avoid objectivity and look for the subjective or more personal in life. Objectivity is the idea that there's a set of objective rules ready-made for all human beings to follow, and each and every one of us in life are merely trying to find those rules and obey them, and we'll all be happy and lead meaningful lives. Existentialists suggest there's no one-size-fits-all rules of life, but in fact each of us are on our own personal journey, a subjective journey, seeking what Kierkegaard once said, a truth which is true for me, a truth, he said, for which I can live or die. And my truth may not be the same as your truth, and that makes it personal, that makes it subjective. And if you are on the same side of those themes as existentialists, then you'll be very attracted to the school of thinking. So let's begin with some of the themes within Søren Kierkegaard. He starts by suggesting that the main existential problem facing human beings is the feeling of guilt. He's among the first to write about this psychological phenomena in his book, The Concept of Dread, and for that reason many consider him one of the fathers of modern psychology. He's writing 80 years or so before Freud. For Kierkegaard, the religious thinker, the source of that guilt is our recognition that we are the kind of person, he calls that the existential self, and that God wants us to become uh, fully actualized, to fully actualize those potentials and become the essential self. It's sort of like Carl Rogers, the existential philosopher, who suggests that we are aware of our actual selves, but how do we become our ideal selves? How can we become fully actualized persons? And the self that God wants us to be, in Kierkegaard's language. There are three overall ways that people attempt this, according to Kierkegaard. There are three kinds of lives that people live. The first is the hedonistic or aesthetic life, where one seeks to live according to impulses and emotions and chalk up as many pleasures as possible, physical, emotional, psychological. Don Juan is Kierkegaard's model for this, the womanizer in literature throughout history. Mozart wrote an opera about Don Juan, and Cervantes' book about Don Juan, etc. But this will fail, says Kierkegaard. It is really the seller of life. The hedonist or aesthete doesn't want to take anything too seriously, because then he'd have to take a stand. Now, the next stage is the ethical stage. This person does want to take things seriously. This person does want to follow the rules. But this stage fails as well, although it lives according to rules and reason rather than impulse and emotion. And although some of the rules certainly apply, not all of them will, again, because of the existential idea that we are all unique individuals and there's not going to be any one-size-fits-all set of rules. The third stage Kierkegaard refers to as the religious stage. And yes, he does use the religious figure of Abraham, but he also uses the figure of Socrates as living in the stage, which indicates that Kierkegaard is not meaning to be, a sectarian Christian and exclusively that. Socrates lives in this stage because he, according to Kierkegaard, lives according to the standards of the stage, which is to face life head-on and to live, in Kierkegaard's words, in a passionate inwardness towards life. To take things passionately, to follow an inward path, again, that subjective or personal path rather than the objective set of rules. And so the person that takes risks, that's willing to jump in, willing to take a stand, willing to be held responsible for those decisions, is living in that final stage. Now, Gabriel Marcel, also the religious existentialists of the 20th century, can be understood in terms of three overall themes. The first is the problem mystery theme, wherein he suggests that most people see life as a set of problems to be solved one at a time. In fact, they see all of life as a problem and other people as problems. This leads to great despondency and depression and negativity. Other people choose to be in the mode of mystery, that is to say, see life as a gift, as a mystery which cannot be fully explained or outlined or objectified, to accept others as friends rather than as things or problems to be solved. The second theme is the theme of spectator and participant, and we've already seen this as one of the basic themes within all existentialists. What Marcel adds to this is the notion that the spectator is really a selfish or egoistic position. The spectator thinks that the entire world revolves around him, including other people. The participant, on the other hand, is the altruist. The participant is somebody who sees others as gifts and wants to get involved. The third distinction is perhaps the one Marcel is most known for, which is the distinction between being and having. This had great impact on the existential psychologist Erich Fromm, who, in his book To Be or to Have, quotes often from Marcel. What is the difference? Well, the haver is the person who, first of all, sees life as a problem and is that egoistic spectator. The haver defines his and other people's value in terms of what they own or have. He or she is a possessor. They have this orientation that unless I have things, I'm worth nothing. Think of the 1930 Depression, the real depression where people literally did jump out of buildings. Who were these people? These were wealthy people. These were people who made the mistake of thinking that their entire value was residing in the things that they had, bank account, cars, homes, etc. And when they lost them, they made the mistake of thinking that they had no more value within, and then committed the ultimate act of suicide. This we see in themes throughout literature, from Adam and Eve, who wanted everything. Remember, the story of Adam and Eve is that they were given everything except one tree, and of course that was the tree they wanted. Or in the Aladdin's lamp story that's been told 1,000 times in many different cultures, and it reveals the greed of people, and how, in fact, Marcel refers to this as the boomerang effect, that the haver will be had, that the master will become a slave. Or the story of King Midas, who was given the gift of the golden touch, except that when he touched his daughter, the only person in the world that he actually loved, she became a dead golden statue. The boomerang effect suggests that if we go through life in the having orientation, then we ourselves will be victims of that. We are far more than anything we have. Think of a resume that you've written up, no matter how good it is. It is simply a list of what you have, beginning with what your name is, your experiences are, your degrees are, etc. We are beyond all of those things that we can have. We are, in that great cliche, a whole which is far greater than the collection of all the parts. The person in the being orientation realizes the mistakes of the haver, does not determine his or her value in terms of what they own or possess, does not treat other people as if they're things to possess, but rather, again, lives in the mystery of life, accepting it as a gift, attempts to participate in life, and again sees life as something to be with. The French word with is avec, and it's a very important word for Marcel, to be with. Not just to exist alongside like rocks and trees can, but to be with others, or to be with the world. To exist is one thing, but to find a meaningful life, which is what the goal of every existentialist is, we have then to adopt these themes that Kierkegaard and Marcel all agree with. Again, try to be individuals, find that truth which is true for me, as a la Kierkegaard. Not to be spectators, but to be participants, right? Not look for an objective set of rules to follow, because we're all individuals and unique in that way. And for Marcel and Kierkegaard, of course, the distinction is they are on the religious end of this. When we get to Nietzsche, Camus, and Sartre next week, you'll see existential thinkers who agree with all of those ideas, that list we've talked about, from being an individual, being free, accepting responsibility, etc. But they disagree on the God question, and they are very rigorously atheistic in their thinking. So we'll hear from that side. But all of them, religious and atheistic existentialists, suggest that the ultimate human quest is to find that meaningful life, and not merely just to exist, but in fact to be. Okay, I hope that this short session has been of some help. As always, we're getting to the end. There's just one more of these for next week. And once again, some of you have responded back, but I'd like to hear from more of you concerning these, either in an email or in Canvas, whether they've been of any help to you or any suggestions so that you'd make about them. Your feedback is of interest to me, and I hope you will do that. Meantime, I'll close this and look forward to your discussions.